There's a problem with RuneScape and nobody is talking about it. Let's watch this one. What is the problem?
What makes old school RuneScape special? What gives it the identity we all love?
Is it the Australians? I blame the Australians.
Is it the art style, the music, the combat, or sound effects? Yes to all those things, but in this video, I want to talk about something different. To do so, I first need to ask a question, one that will become more relevant the deeper in the video we go. What happens when an old, beloved system of a game begins to deteriorate the philosophy that defines it, a cannibalism of game design? I know that means nothing right now, but keep it in mind while we talk about progression. Old school RuneScape's permanent character progression has been talked to death now. Everyone uses the cross-pollination of different skills as evidence for the game's longevity and success. How some pieces of content remain relevant for, well, ever, and how that alone makes investing thousands of hours into the game easy to do. There's no rush to the endgame when there's little depreciation in what you earn. Pick up the game, choose how you play, and off you go. But how does that work? The answer is as easy or complicated as you make it. Some people, including myself, can summarize by saying it's a sandbox, or as I call it, a curated sandbox MMO, meaning the content and its progression is planned, is meticulously designed, but also is open-ended enough to retain player agency. While osrs being a curated sandbox certainly explains what makes it last, it doesn't explain how it is made to last. What about RuneScape systems can have both satisfying vertical points of progression, new armor, weapons, and so on, while not outmoding those that exist today? More frighteningly, how has that begun to change? Because it has. Things today aren't as they once were, and noticing this has made me somewhat concerned for the game's future. So let's talk about that. Old school RuneScape may be struggling to keep parts of its identity, but you don't have to with this video's sponsor, NordVPN.
Theory-wise is so smart. I think he's going to lose some viewers when he uses words like player agency, horizontal vertical progressions, when he says you can do this or that. I think that he's so smart, bro, that I'm trying to... It might be tough for some people to follow along, and I don't even know what some of those words mean, so it's tough for me too.
VPN, a leading service that creates a secure, encrypted tunnel for your internet connection, keeping you safe from hackers, malware, and censorship. It has become increasingly easier to fall. Now let's get back to the video. Put simply, the way old school RuneScape, more accurately RuneScape 2, designed its content since release has been through power creep. It's a term that elicits fear from players because more often than not, power creep insinuates...
Can anybody summarize the point he's trying to make here? And I'm going to try and guess what he's saying. But so far, I think what he's saying is that horizontal progression is in danger in the game. Is that kind of what you guys picked up from it? That some items are getting replaced too quickly? That's what I'm thinking here.
Devaluation. By introducing
new content
into your game, you run the high risk of devaluing that which it is power creeping. If a cape with double the stats of the Inferno cape was released as a drop from a mid-game boss, that would devalue the Inferno cape drastically. Why spend weeks learning some of the hardest content in the entire game when you can pummel a new mid-game boss for a few hours and get a better item? While the status of the Inferno cape may continue to be recognized, its purpose ceases to exist. That brings us to the coolest part of old school RuneScape, which is how it handles power creep. This was something I noticed while playing for the first time over a year ago, and something that to this day always impresses me. Things are power crept, yet somehow old school RuneScape managed to not devalue them in the process. How? Let's take a look at Barrows. Released in 2005, it introduced multiple sets of new armor and weapons, better than anything else that came before it. And at that point, it was the endgame of RuneScape, and it dropped the appropriate gear to match that. Better than Rune, better than Dragon. Over time, that changed. With new updates, new bosses, new endgame, Barrows lost its position as endgame content. In half a decade, it became mid-game content. And then, a decade or so later, deep into old school RuneScape's lifecycle, it's now early game content. It has shifted down in its place, but it still has a place. The items are still valuable, the drops are still important, and the content is still done.
Are you guys worried that one day Infernal Cape will be too easy and that all these new potions and things that are coming into the game are going to trivialize it. It already is.
And that's without flattening the game's power curve overall. RuneScape still power creeps its game. That's the beauty of it. You get the feeling of vertical progression while not devaluing what came before due to the way what came before scooches down in time. It's not far-fetched to say that this is one of RuneScape's greatest successes, and whether acknowledged or not, is a massive part of its identity. It's kind of the root of what everyone else constantly praises, longevity, achieved through such a clean solution to power creep. Like, genuinely, what game has managed to do something like this over such a long period of time?
None.
But sadly, that may have come to an end. Before we talk about how, I want to take a quick look at how power creep is handled by other MMOs, such as World of Warcraft. Every 6 months, a new raid is released, and with it, every single item you've spent the past 6 months obtaining
all gone.
is
It's all
rendered
trash.
completely useless in the span of a single weekend. I wish I was joking. You are earning virtually identical pieces of gear from brain-dead overworld content that is matching the power of the heroic raiding gear in the previous patch. For RuneScape context, imagine a Slayer task that guarantees an upgrade over your Noxious Halberd. Let's call it the Extra Noxious Halberd, that has 30% more strength bonus and slash bonus, and as I mentioned, is guaranteed at the end of a single Slayer task. For an OSRS player, that sounds crazy, yet that's the paradigm through which most modern theme park MMOs operate. Gear is far easier to obtain and therefore becomes
way
replaceable.
easier.
This allows Blizzard to continue designing linear, vertical power progression, but it comes at the cost of item identity and player time. Speaking as someone who spent over a decade doing the hardest stuff in WoW, it got to the point where nothing I ever earned felt like anything because it was earned with the knowledge that it'd be rendered useless next quarter. It becomes glut, pointless, and explains why the most recognizable items in WoW's history all come from a time when this wasn't as demonstrably the case. People remember the rarest and coolest items from vanilla WoW all the way back in 2004 because they were unique, irreplaceable, and powerful. They remember items from a time when the game was less popular because that's how much impact those items had. Most items in old school RuneScape inhabit this ethos. That's what makes them exciting to obtain, even when they aren't huge power increases. The difference between a zombie axe...
Chat, I've always said this. The best item in RuneScape, in my opinion, is the Avernic Treads. Because you need previous BIS items to like merge into it to make the boots better. So imagine that you needed all, like, I don't know, imagine you needed all of these stab weapons to combine them into the best stab weapon kind of thing. So like combining old loot makes you still have to go back and get the old loot. The old loot is still good, but in order to get the new BIS, you still need all the old weapons. I love the idea of treads, and eventually it's like you can't keep adding items to the game, but if you did that style system, like the tread style design, it could work with more items than just treads, and I really like that. Which for me, Classic WoW, I would love in Classic WoW where you could get tier 2, but you could also add your tier 1 into your tier 2 to make your tier 2 stronger. So it gives you a reason to have to go back and run the old stuff if you want to have the best gear. I like that idea.
and an
With
abyssal
BIS
whip
rings
is
too, yeah.
relatively minor, but the devil
Masori
is in the
upgrades,
details.
yeah.
Other MMOs
Fortify
flatten their
Masori and
power curve
Torva.
completely. Games like ESO and Guild
You upgrade, yeah, you upgrade bandos into Torva, you upgrade the ring, Ultor rings, your Zerker ring to an Ultor. These type of upgrades, best game design for horizontal progression because it makes you go back and get the old stuff first. It's so good.
Wars 2 don't have much or any vertical progression after a certain point, and to me, that eventually makes them kind of boring to
Live
play.
fast. Thank you for the
After
prime.
all, isn't the lifeblood of an RPG making your character stronger, better, cooler? Isn't that how we justify killing all kinds of crazy demons and dragons? Neither solution is perfect. That's where RuneScape comes in. Back in 2005, when the Slayer skill first released and the Abyssal Whip was added alongside it, it obviously power crept the game. The most powerful melee item before that was the Dragon Scimitar, and if we are to calculate the difference between the two, we'd notice it's pretty substantial, far more so than most upgrades released today. Thankfully, all of this was balanced by the fact that the whip was harder to obtain. 85 Slayer was a longer grind than any quest, and even then, it still demanded one farm's high-level monsters for enough time to even obtain the drop. Meanwhile, the scimitar was relatively cheap by comparison. With each new update that introduced a new best item, the expectation of what was required of that item rose. If the Abyssal Whip is to be power crept, which it was in 2010 with the release of the Chaotic Rapier,
Abyssal Whip can be upgraded into Tentacle Whip. This is a great system as well.
then that item must be more difficult to
Alaskan
obtain
Goat, thank you for the gift
and
sub.
require higher stats to equip, which it did. 80 attack as compared to the 70 of the Whip and 60 of the Dragon Scimitar. The progression here feels natural. Every 10 attack levels, you unlock the ability to wear something better. While this was disrupted by the Evolution of Combat update in 2012, 2 years after the release of Dungeoneering that the Chaotic Rapier was originally added alongside,
Another one.
what's fascinating to me is that the Evolution of Combat, in some ways, was a response to the power creep of the game. It was Jagex becoming conscious that this is a finite pool to dip into. Sure, it took 5 years to finally release a weapon that's better than the Whip, but if we are to follow the same trend that we have been, it'd only take 10 years to release an item that requires 99 attack to wield? What then? Where do we go from there? As we all know, the Evolution of Combat did not solve any of these issues, but it's worth acknowledging that they are issues worth considering and trying to solve. Jagex had a second chance with the release of old school Runescape, and eventually the new bespoke content that came with it. Zulrah was the first original old school RuneScape
Alaskan
boss
Goat just
ever
keeps
released.
going in, baby.
Simultaneously a test
Thank you.
and a vision of what the future for the game could be and what the future would be defined by. Zulrah was not only harder than all the content preceding it, it was different. Philosophically, the design of the fight introduced new kinds of mechanics to the game that have never been seen before. Recently, I spoke with Mod Rice, the game designer behind Yama, Perilous Moons, and more. When I asked him about Jagex's boss design philosophy and how it has changed over time, he motioned toward one specific thing.
I believe probably if no one had the idea to throw a rock at a tile and deal damage to the player when they were stood on that tile, like that was like the inception of, I think it happened from,
Another
like,
one.
My Arm's Big Adventure.
Another one.
That was the inception of the shadow on ground mechanic. And if no one had that idea at any point, or no one, you might say, well, it wasn't their idea, they copied it from a different game, probably, maybe, who knows. But if no one had implemented that idea in old school RuneScape, we would still have combat that amounted to nothing more than, okay, I hit you, you hit me, and whoever dies first loses.
A rock. Specifically, a falling rock coded by Mod Ash all the way back in 2006, during the creation of My Arm's Big Adventure, a goofy quest that saw the player aid a troll named My Arm as he struggled to learn how to farm. The climax of this quest featured a fight against a level 172 giant rock, a big bird, and in that fight, that rock launches a rock. A ranged attack at the player, which lands at your most recent position. These attacks are completely avoidable and done so by paying attention to the ground. At that time, there were no active telegraphs, meaning an indicator for when the attack will land or when it will be cast. But that incredibly simple thing was revolutionary for RuneScape. And as Mod Rice outlines, it eventually transformed into a simple shadow on the ground, a telegraph, a way to visually communicate when something is about to hit you. Since then, every fight in the game utilizes something akin to this.
Yeah, those shadows on the ground really changed the game, huh?
Player. And as the developers became more comfortable with this newfound design philosophy, they began creating more complex and impressive encounters. If you are interested in the full podcast, you can listen to it by becoming a member on this channel, or waiting just a little bit longer for it to become available on my second channel, Theorywiser. If you don't already know, this second channel houses my podcast, Fireside, where I bring on creators, developers, and more to discuss all kinds of video games. So if you want to catch up on all the episodes you've missed, feel free to check them out on Theorywiser. Link in the description. Anyway, Zulrah took this and ran with it. Now you have long-lasting debuffs on the ground in the form of poison clouds that the player can avoid through meticulous planning, forethought, and reaction speed. And hey, Vorkath is much the same way. Except instead of a boulder, it's a ball of fire, and you can actually see where it's about to land. Finally, today, we get complex iterations of this basic concept. The reason I bring all of this up is as justification for power creep. That's what Zulrah did. It released a magic and ranged weapon that were the best in the entire game. Also a helmet that was superior to the best in slot melee helmet preceding it. 3 items, 3 points of power creep, all obtained through a new endgame encounter that tested players more than just about anything else. The ranged weapon, the Toxic Blowpipe, was horribly overtuned, overpowered to a laughable degree, and that alone caused quite a few issues down the line, but as a proof of concept, Zulrah was sound. It worked. It made for the best encounter in the game up until that point. Retrospectively, it works even better because it slots perfectly into the great achievement of Runescape that I outlined earlier. A decade later, Zulrah is no longer the endgame boss it once was, and its drops are certainly not the best anymore. Yet, people still do Zulrah. It's a popular destination for just about every Iron Man. In the mid-game.
Right.
It took a decade, but Zulrah is now firmly a mid-game boss, and its loot, while not the best, is a piece of the puzzle needed to eventually obtain what is best. So Jagex kind of nailed it, right? At this point, Zulrah feels about as RuneScape as anything else from 2007 and earlier, just more polished and engaging. That trend continued with the release of Vorkath and even the first raid, the Chambers of Xeric, which, as you can see, also has shadows on the ground in the form of these fallen crystals. Meanwhile, Vorkath is being done earlier and earlier in someone's account journey. To jump back to the first raid for a moment, it followed the trend. It launched as endgame content, but one's ability to interact with it has slowly been brought down, with more powerful items slowly being introduced into the game. Unfortunately, that trend has stopped with the release of the Theater of Blood. In 2018, something changed. The second raid was launched, much to the praise of all those who did.
We talked about this today, but there's only 2 items that you really need in Theater of Blood. I'm talking from an Iron Man perspective, and I would say it was the Avernic Defender and the Scythe. Everything else you can do without. So I don't know what he's going to mention, but we did have this conversation earlier today.
Did it. To this day, it's considered some of the best content in the game. It's certainly more challenging than the Chambers of Xeric, and it offers a different set of rewards to fit alongside Chambers. New best-in-slot melee weapons, a new best-in-slot mage weapon that's oh so slightly better than what came from Zulrah, an upgrade to the Dragon Defender, and tank armor no one uses.
Saying was bis on release. Okay.
It's mid-game content.
That makes sense.
Except it isn't. I just lied. It's actually exactly where it was on release. The Theater of Blood hasn't moved an inch. While Chambers of Xeric's pivot is slow, and it can be seen as a precursor to this immobility issue, TOB is completely stationary. It's still considered the hardest and last thing one does in their general.
I would say that the loot from Cox is way stronger and better than any of the other raids. There is best in slot mage gear, three pieces. There is 2 prayers, which you absolutely have to have. Those are like in-game bis, and you use them forever. That's 5 items already that you need. The best bow in the game, T-bow. The best wand in the game, Kodai. We're up to 7 items. And then the Elder Maul, which is the best spec weapon to lower enemies' defense. And then the Claws is one of the best spec weapons in the game for damage. We're up to 9 items already. And then the other ones are arguable. The other ones, it starts to get a little bit questionable after that. Dragon Hunter Crossbow has its use when you're fighting dragons. It's a niche weapon, so there's like a special niche weapon for it. So you could argue that there's 10 weapons in the game, or 10 items in Chambers that you need. Versus TOB, there's 2 items that you need now. There's still 10 items in Chambers that you need for in-game biz, which is pretty crazy. TOA, Lightbearer Fang you need. Masori you need, that's 5. Shadow you need, 6. 6 items in TOA that you need. The ward is ass, who cares about it? So 6. You need 6 items from TOA, and there's 10 in Cox, and there's 2 in TOB. There's really only 2 items you need in TOB. So that's kind of the layout of the raids right now. Cox is just OP, the loot-wise.
PVM journey. Challenge content like the Inferno and the Sanguine Torva armor aside. On its face, this isn't a problem, right? Who cares? The Inferno is still endgame, and that released even earlier. Big whoop. Inferno is a bit different though. It's specifically a challenge mode.
Chat, can you hold a Tumikin Shadow and a ward? Is Tumikin Shadow one-handed or is it two-handed? It's two-handed. So you can't hold a ward and a Tumikin Shadow at the same time, but you don't use Shadow anywhere. War. Yo, CLX, thank you for the 5 gifted subs, dropping the bomb on the stream. Legend, my friend, thank you so much. I mean, I guess you could say maybe 7 items if you consider the ward when you're pairing it with the Kodai. So there you go.
A signifier of someone's skill and rewards one minor upgrade. It's designed to last, even though it has become far easier in time with other forms of power creep simplifying or even mitigating certain challenges. Most recently, the addition of the Confliction Gauntlets, which allow players to be much more accurate with their barrages and therefore bring less mage gear. Not only that, but the release of the Gauntlet and its associated crystal armor and bow was another rather large shift for the Inferno 2, as they lowered the barrier to entry by hundreds of millions of gold for mains and a mid-game slice of content for Iron Men.
All of the mid-game stuff they added in the game, Priphanos, Crystal Gear, and Varlamore, all the gear from Varlamore has been fantastic. It's been absolutely fantastic for the game.
You can obtain a Bofa and crystal armor, and if you're good enough, send the Inferno. Hell, a WoW player essentially did just that. What you can't do, and what isn't done nearly as much, is the Theater of Blood.
There's me.
There have been no earlier entries.
I made it.
It's still as insular a demographic as ever, even though there have been quite a few items that render it easier. But again, who cares? Well, that's the issue, actually. When a piece of content in RuneScape remains stationary as a progression point, the items within it begin to be devalued by the power creep that would otherwise shift the content downstream. So when a better mage staff was released, that didn't affect Zulrah much, it just pivoted down to earlier in someone's progression path. But when a better magic staff was added than the one in the Theater of Blood, well, shit, its price, its value collapsed by almost triple. On one hand, that's okay if the reason for this is an inflation of supply.
Nobody uses
more
Sang
people do the
anymore, huh?
content and introduce more of this item into the economy. But that's not what's happening though. The raid is still endgame.
Is it time to nerf the cost of Sang's usage or something? Is it time to nerf the amount of bloods needed to use the Sang to try and make Sang great again? Because no one seems to be using it. I personally don't care about it. And why are there items in the raid in TOB that I don't care about? I should want all of them. If I don't care about the items, shouldn't they buff the items to make you care about them? Or change something about them so people care about the items again? I mean, now I'm just sad. I got my Avernic Defender. Now, every item that drops from TOB when I go, if it's not a scythe, I'm going to just not be that excited. Some stuff has to be mediocre. Name something in Cox that's mediocre. Name something in TOA that's mediocre. We just did this. They're all good items. We just said that they're all bis in a certain thing. And you guys are naming like one item. Like pretty much all of Justicar you don't really care about. Rapier's okay. It's only bis over Fang for low defense mobs. And then the Sang staff, everyone's saying is expensive to use and it's not bis anymore. You want Rapier for Slayer. Exactly. That's its use. Its usage is Slayer. That's it.
Most people still don't do it. Zulrah prices may have gone down a bit when a better item was released, but by and large, their prices are not only safer, but also determined by access. For the Sanguinesti staff in the Theater of Blood, though, access remains challenging. The item is just dog shit. It's not the only one, too. The Grazi Rapier was a more careful implementation of the Chaotic Rapier from 2010, a stab weapon that became a natural progression over the Abyssal Whip. The Grazi Rapier was never a great item thanks to just how minor the power increase was, but that has been rendered even more insubstantial with the introduction of the Uzmumten's Fang in the third raid, the Tomes of Amasket. A raid designed explicitly to be more scalable, meaning that more people can do it far earlier in their progression, and it conceptually scales all the way to endgame. It rewards a slower, more accurate stab weapon that completely nullified the Grazi Rapier. Not just because it's more powerful, it's not in some low defense situations, but because it's so much easier to obtain while having more uses than the Rapier. All of this becomes sillier when the Noxious Halberd was introduced with Araxor, a simple Slayer boss. The Noxious Halberd is worth more than the Grazi Rapier because it not only has more use cases, but it's also more obtainable. And that will only become further true as Araxor is power crept in time and shifts down in someone's progression path. The Theater of Blood is the first true demonstration of what I call stationary content. It falls outside of the expected cycle of RuneScape power progression and becomes devalued with every single new endgame update. The only item
So he kind of is making a point here that the TOB items are losing their value. But the other ones really aren't. TOA and Cox is really holding their value on these items. But TOBs, the Sang and the Rapier are kind of losing their value, and they're going to continue losing their value because new items get added into the game. Is what he's saying here.
That hasn't faced this perpetual agony is the Mega Rare, the Scythe, and that's only due to its insane scaling with strength bonus. But that poses the issue, or the question, of whether a raid's value should be hanging on by a thread of a single ultra rare item. That makes it frustrating to run, and that makes the rewards that it provides less tangible and eventually may outmode it entirely. The Theater of Blood may be the first piece of this kind of content, but it isn't the last. In fact, every single piece of endgame content in old school RuneScape is stationary now. Yama, Nightmare, you name it. We're already seeing the fallout from this. The only outlier—
He's saying they're less accessible. Their value is held because you can't access Tob in the mid game like the other raids. Tob is gatekept by having BIS items. You do have to be very geared to get into Tob. Like even me, I'm still kind of under-geared for TOB.
Fire is Nex due to the way that it was implemented. We'll touch on this further later, but Nex's antiquated and honestly deeply unfun design allows it to gatekeep access. Its borderline unavoidable damage is a mitigating factor. Besides that, Yama released months ago and was a perfect example of progression nullification. The Oathplate armor from Yama is arguably easier to obtain than Bandos armor from General Grardor, yet it is better in just about every single way. Certainly in damage output, which is king in OSRS. Now all you need to do is get Blood Moon armor from Perilous Moons, which is equivalent in damage output to Bandos, obtain the Synapses from Tormented Demons, a mid-game piece of Slayer content, and you are essentially able to solo and duo Yama. So what the hell is going on? This is a problem, sure, but why has Jagex's game design philosophy changed? Here's the weird thing though, it hasn't. In fact, this feels like an irreconcilable problem of old school RuneScape's system design. It, like death, is an unavoidable destination with the current systems of the game. Contrary to popular belief, this is not an issue with difficulty. Kind of. It is, but not in the way that it is often discussed. Yama's release was somewhat controversial because of the quality of reward not matching the difficulty of the fight. I don't totally agree. I think Yama is not only one of the best bosses in the game, but also think that making him harder wouldn't solve much of anything. Because the methods through which difficulty is implemented into old school RuneScape in 2025 is mechanical, not randomly getting hit 4 times off prayer by Zulrah. The symptom of devaluation is a systemic problem. If Yama was as difficult as solo Theater of Blood, all that would do is limit access mechanically, but Bandos wouldn't suddenly have more value. You don't need Bandos to do Yama, and obtaining it wouldn't suddenly bypass the mechanics check. Hell, it's kind of a waste of time to get if it weren't a component of Torva. That's because armor, as a statistic, has minimal value in old school RuneScape on bosses. The difference between Yama with full Blood Moon and Yama with full Bandos is borderline non-existent, especially if you understand the way the fight works. The boss isn't the issue. A lack of scarcity is a symptom of a greater problem. Armor, stats, endgame progression. When I say that old school RuneScape could be losing its identity, I mean that the success of mitigating item devaluation is no longer possible in today's incarnation of the game, specifically in its endgame.
Yeah,
losing this part of old school that made me
guys, that whole sentence just made me feel dumb. I don't know what he just said. I'm sorry.
Appreciate its design so much is a loss of identity, and quite frankly, I'm not seeing enough people talk about it. Sure, you can motion to the Theater of Blood as having been power crept, and you have more than enough people being scared of power creep, but power creep, once more, is not the issue. We've always had it, and we should if we want to retain our status as a curated sandbox MMO. We don't want to flatten progression, we want to retain it. The second old school RuneScape stops releasing more powerful items in the endgame is the second half of the endgame player base stops doing content. But what does retaining progression look like in—
I have a friend I've known for 20 plus years. We were so hyped when Yama was announced. We are not friends anymore. I have never killed Yama. Wait, you and your friend tried to get a Yama kill and you guys couldn't kill him, and so now you're not friends anymore?
in a game that's
Type
struggling
shit.
to add endgame rewards. That's the final nail in this depressing coffin. The real reason why all of this is happening is one that I don't think the old school RuneScape community at large would want to see solved, because by solving it, there may need to be drastic change to this game. This stagnation happens in the endgame because the endgame of old school RuneScape is governed by your own power limit. Every piece of endgame content expects maxed combat stats, for example. It requires access to the resources that you obtain early in your progression journey, prayer pots, Sardaco brews, basic food, and it's not gated by anything substantial. There was a time where most people who wanted to kill Zuck and obtain the Inferno Cape had to do so with a twisted bow because the alternatives were substantially weaker. Now you can very well send it with crystal armor and the Bofa. Hell, most people probably do. It's a gate that opened up and allowed more people to engage.
I sure
All
did.
content pretty much works like this in OSRS. There's never an explicit, hard barrier between you and the boss you have to kill that's not as simple as a quest requirement. It's rare that a single upgrade prevents a kill. Upgrades and power just make those kills easier. There is a lack of limiters or tuning knobs that may act like them. This creates a stagnant oasis of endgame content that's all governed by max stats and decent-ish gear. As long as you have that, you can do it about as well as anyone else. And that will hold true forever. Every single piece of endgame gear in old school RuneScape fundamentally lacks the tuning knobs needed to mitigate early access. You will always be able to hop into a melee-centric fight with early to mid-game gear like Blood Moon armor and do just fine. The kill will be slightly slower, but the rewards will be just about proportionally greater. That's beautiful, but also damning in the endgame. The antiquated design left behind by the titular rock and its eventual shadow paved the way to where we are today, a world that is governed by skill checks, not stat checks. On its face, that sounds awesome. But in practice, it creates this very issue. When Olm or Zulrah RNG jad you over and over again, it's fucking annoying, but it's also kind of a tuning knob to limit access. You can outplay it, but not entirely. I'm not trying to suggest that we should bring this style of content back. I think the PVM in OSRS would be far worse if more fights like Nex were added, but they undeniably have some utility for being that way. These are now considered antiquated solutions. The community has rallied.
Does he? Wait, I'm trying. Does he want the game to be more skill based or more gear based? I'm actually not following. I'm trying to. He wants the game to be more gear based and less skill based. Some of both. Oh man.
Against chip damage, which is small amounts of damage one takes from praying correctly, for this very same reason, since when something is unavoidable, it can often feel punishing in an unsatisfying way. So modern fights and the design philosophies that define them did away with most of this, and replaced them with nothing. What do endgame requirements look like today, and how is the lack of those requirements detrimental to the longevity of that content? Most importantly, what's the solution? There have been attempts. I think Jagex are the first ones to point out this issue and begin designing around it. For example, you could have a mechanic on a boss that requires you to hit higher than a certain threshold via a guaranteed maximum hit like you'd see on Wardenheart, to pass an arbitrary check and continue the fight. Like on Fasani's Nightmare, the little goobers that spawn and hit you could instead spawn and one-shot you if you don't dispatch them with a single swing. That wouldn't work on every encounter, but it would potentially promote higher strength bonus gear as a kind of DPS check, a hard gate to that content. Would people like that though? It would certainly remove a level of emergence from the game. You can't do a level 40 Inferno if you need to somehow hit 60 damage at certain phases. That alone is a sacrifice of identity. Meanwhile, soft gates can be achieved through balancing. If you have an armor set that greatly increases your slash accuracy, such as Oathblade from Yama, then you can implement content with high enough defense that you need to get that armor to create satisfying, consistent kills. And that could be interesting, but it also poses the threat of requiring huge stat swings in the game's itemization. A 3% bonus to accuracy may not justify or warrant a 100-odd hour endgame grind to make another 100-odd hour endgame grind 3% faster. What I'm getting at is that this all boils down to the atomization of stats in old school, the binary strict itemization that to me has begun to show its age, in a bad way. There simply are too few impactful statistics in RuneScape, especially in the endgame, and that is only becoming more clear with how every piece of endgame content fundamentally can't require completion of other endgame content to do. Most recently, the Doom of Makwahatl boss released, and the best gear against it was all mid-game. Scorching Bow, Elite Void, maybe a Crystal Halberd, or whatever else. Very easy to acquire for a boss that's not only one of the hardest in the game, but also drops inordinately powerful upgrades. The solution isn't to be afraid of power creep, but to adapt to it. RuneScape would not succeed if vertical progression is eliminated, but it's also not succeeding in its implementation of vertical progression at the endgame right now. Not to me. For example, there are only 2 archetypes for strength bonus gear in the game, and that creates awkward scenarios where you either have a chest piece that gives 4 or 6 strength bonus. Everything else is kind of irrelevant. Because max hits are king and govern output, maximum hits only being obtained in increments of 4 strength bonus become really difficult to manage. They lack malleability. You either have the max hit, or the item you just equipped is functionally worthless. That doesn't feel good no matter how you spin it, especially when it required like 100 hours to obtain. And the rock, paper, scissors of matching your attack style to the enemy's weakness only takes you so far. At a certain point, we won't just start seeing content get devalued, we'll start seeing content become irrelevant entirely. It would be a cataclysmic failure if in 15 years, Yama is looked at in the same way the Calphite Queen is. That's an extreme example, and I don't think Jagex would do that, but a fear nevertheless. The solution, as I mentioned above, will come in the form of some kind of sacrifice. That sounds dramatic, but I predict old school RuneScape and its community will need to have a truly challenging conversation about the future of the game's progression. Whether it's in a year or 5, it'll happen. The solution may manifest as a growing demand for an itemization rebalance, a rework of stats in the game. What does that look like? Does armor now operate on a breakpoint system where at certain increments you receive a flat damage negation, which allows Jagex to implement more guaranteed damage in the endgame encounters that is mitigated through equally endgame armor? Are combat stats given more malleability, such as strength bonuses now not being determined by increments of 4, but rather operating through a percent chance system, where every strength bonus gives you a 25% chance of exceeding your maximum hit, culminating in that 4 strength breakpoint that guarantees it? Or is it something even greater, like entirely new stats or even mechanics that would add more depth to the reward space in old school?
He's pointing out the fact that you don't get a max hit sometimes when you get an upgrade. And he's saying if you get an upgrade, like a 2 strength or a 3 strength upgrade, maybe you should have a chance of getting that max hit. I think that could be kind of cool. A 50% chance of getting the max hit if I have a +2 strength or something. I don't know. I could see that being kind of sick.
Instead of being limited to adding slight incremental increases to strength bonus with every new 4 or 5 tick weapon introduced into the game, what if there were ways to make slower weapons more useful through an introduction of entirely bespoke mechanics associated with them? What if you were guaranteed to hit twice as hard against enemies below a certain threshold if you used a weapon that was 6 ticks or slower? What if there was a parry? That's right, what if old school RuneScape became Dark Souls Sekiro? What then? What you gonna do about it? Cry? Shit your pants? What I'm trying to get at is that old school RuneScape operates in the strict heterodoxy of its 2007 systems. We may have advanced in our design philosophy, but what surrounds those philosophies are the very same systems that existed way back then. And now we go back to that very first question I posed in this video. What happens when that adherence to the past leads us down a road that no longer resembles the past? 2007 saw the game's updates operate through the kind of mitigated power creep I outlined earlier in the video. New endgame content was added, and current endgame content slightly pivoted downstream. Relevancy was retained, but its position changed. That still occurred in OSRS's first endgame updates, but eventually we hit a hard limit of statistics and levels. Max combat and minimal content gating has bred an environment where the newest endgame boss runs the risk of outmoding existing endgame bosses that fit similar niches. We don't have huge power swings like World of Warcraft that devalue existing content with new content. Those old yet lovable systems in RuneScape that many players grew up with have paved the way to the most satisfying MMO progression on Earth, in my humble opinion. but they aren't flawless, and maybe, just maybe, we can start to separate the system from its ethos. What's great about itemization in old school is not that there's a stab, slash, and crush bonus, but how those things have been implemented. That is a philosophy, not a direct system. The system can change, but the philosophy needs to remain. And right now, the system has, to me, begun to hit a point where it is grinding against the philosophy we love. So the conversation that needs to be had is a little bit deeper, a little less surface level. As scary as it sounds, it could be that to retain this beautiful element of RuneScape's identity, we have to let go of a system to save a philosophy.
Type shit, chat. What y'all think about that, huh? I'm so dumb. I couldn't understand some of it. I understand simple things, guys. Like, why come I get +1 strength, but I no get +1 hit? I understand that. And I understand I'm mad because I get +1 strength, but I no get +1 hit. I understand that. And maybe there's a fix for that. And we could talk about that. That's about how I understand things. And so I think that that's where he was coming from on some of this stuff. And then he was concerned with the horizontal progression and some things maybe getting outdated, like Yama. But I think inevitably, guys, horizontal progression cannot exist forever. I don't think it can. I don't know if Scythe will always be the best weapon. Inevitably, something will have to be better than it 20 years from now. And then Scythe will be second best. It'll be like a stepping stone or something. But inevitably, yeah, maybe Yama will be looked at like Calfight Queen. And maybe Oathplate won't be the best slash anymore. I don't know. But the way of looking at it as stepping stones, I think as long as you're designing a game that's horizontal, as long as you don't make old gear irrelevant, it's good in certain scenarios, or it's a stepping stone in order that you need in order to get the best gear. It can always kind of work fundamentally for me. So I think RuneScape's doing a pretty good job of it right now. I don't have any issues. I think they're doing a great job, actually. So I'm not really too worried about it.